a sad goodbye. I'm an old man now, but I still remember the past very clearly. I have a wife, children, and my mother lives with us too. My wife takes care of the house, and my children always make the house lively with their laughter and play. My mother, though very old now, still helps us in any way she can. She is kind and loving, and we all take care of her. One summer, my family and I decided to go on a trip. We had not travelled for a long time, and we were all excited. We wanted to visit the beach, enjoy the sun, and have fun as a family. The children were especially happy because they love the beach. My wife was happy too. It would be a good time for us to relax and enjoy each other's company. But there was one problem. My mother was too old to travel. She couldn't walk very well anymore, and the trip would be too difficult for her. I felt sad thinking about it. She always took care of us, and now we had to leave her behind. We didn't want to, but we thought it would be better for her to stay at home where she would be more comfortable. So we decided to leave her at home for a few days. We told her not to worry. She smiled and said it was fine. She told us to have fun and not to think about her. I kissed her on the cheek, and she waved goodbye as we left the house. But deep down I felt uneasy. I wished we could have taken her with us, but I didn't say anything. As we drove away, I looked back at our house. My mother was still standing at the door, waving at us. She looked happy, but I saw a little sadness in her eyes. I should have paid more attention to that feeling. Little did I know that would be the last time I would see her standing there. We went on our trip, and it was a beautiful place. The beach was wide and the water was clear and blue. The children played in the sand and built big castles. My wife and I walked along the shore, talking and laughing. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. It felt like a dream, and I was happy to be with my family. But even with all the joy, I couldn't stop thinking about my mother. She was alone at home. I hoped she was comfortable, but I didn't know for sure. The thought of her alone made me feel uneasy. I wished I had not left her behind. I kept telling myself that she would be fine, but deep down I felt guilty. On the second day of our trip, we decided to call her. We wanted to hear her voice and see if she was okay. My wife called her on the phone, but the call went straight to voicemail. That was strange. My mother never let the phone go to voicemail. We tried again, but there was no answer. Now I started to worry. I told my wife that something was not right. We finished our day at the beach, but I couldn't stop thinking about my mother. I decided to go back to the hotel early that evening. My wife noticed that I was upset, but I didn't want to tell her what was wrong. I kept it to myself, trying not to worry her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Finally, after a long night, we packed our things and left the beach. We drove back home as quickly as we could. The whole time I was thinking of my mother and hoping she was still okay. I wanted to hold her hand and tell her everything would be fine. I just couldn't get rid of the feeling that I had made a mistake by leaving her alone. When we arrived home, everything was quiet. The house was dark and there was no sound. My heart was heavy as I walked through the door. I called out for my mother, but there was no answer. I felt a chill run through me. My wife and children followed me inside, but we still didn't hear anything. I walked to the kitchen, and there was no sign of her. I checked her room, but it was empty. I felt a deep sense of fear growing inside me. My mind raced, thinking about where she could be. I called her name again and again, but still there was no answer. I ran to the living room, and there, lying quietly on the couch, was my mother. She had passed away while we were away. I knelt down beside her, holding her hand, but it was cold. My heart broke. I felt a rush of guilt flood over me. I had left her alone, and now she was gone. I hadn't been there when she needed me the most. I sat there for a long time, not knowing what to do. My children stood behind me, confused and scared. My wife came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, but her words couldn't take away the pain. I felt like I had failed her, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. The next few days were hard. We made all the necessary arrangements and said goodbye to my mother. I couldn't stop thinking about her. I remembered the good times, the stories she told, and the love she gave. But now all that was gone. I couldn't help but feel regret. I should have stayed with her. I should. The days passed slowly, and I couldn't shake the feeling of loss. Every room in the house felt empty without her. I missed her voice, her smile, and the way she always took care of us. My children were sad too. They didn't understand why their grandmother wasn't there anymore. I spent a lot of time thinking about what had happened. I remembered how excited I was for the trip. It was supposed to be a fun time for our family, a time to make memories together. But now I couldn't stop thinking about how I had made the wrong choice by leaving her behind. It hurt me deeply to know that I would never be able to see her again. I went to the garden one morning and sat by the flowers she used to care for. She loved the garden. It was where she spent most of her time. I could almost hear her voice telling me to take care of the plants. I promised myself that I would keep the garden beautiful for her, but it wasn't enough. Nothing could bring her back. My wife tried to comfort me, but the pain was still there. She understood, but she also knew that nothing could change what had happened. We all tried to go on with our lives, but it was hard. Every time I looked at my children, I saw the sadness in their eyes. They missed their grandmother, just like I did. I knew I couldn't change the past, but I promised myself that I would never make the same mistake again. I would cherish every moment with my family. I would never take them for granted. Life is short, and I learned that the hard way. My mother's death taught me a painful lesson, one I would never forget. Months passed, and the pain of losing my mother didn't go away. It stayed with me, like a shadow that I couldn't escape. I tried to focus on my family and take care of my children, but my heart was still heavy. I often thought about the good times we had with my mother. She was always there for us, taking care of the house and making us feel safe. One day, as I was looking through old photos, I found a picture of my mother and me when I was young. We were at the beach, smiling and happy. I remembered how she used to tell me stories and how we would laugh together. That picture brought back so many memories. It made me realize just how much she had done for me. I showed the picture to my children, and we talked about their grandmother. It was a way for us to keep her memory alive. My children asked me many questions about her, and I told them everything I remembered. They were curious, and I was happy to share those memories with them. It felt good to talk about her and remember the love she gave us. Though the sadness never fully went away, I began to feel a sense of peace. I understood that life moves on, but the love we have for those we lose doesn't disappear. My mother would always be in my heart, and I would make sure her memory lived on in our family. I also realized that we can't always control what happens in life. Sometimes we make mistakes, and we have to live with the consequences. But it's important to learn from those mistakes and do better in the future. I promised myself that I would never take my family for granted again, and I would always make time for the people I loved. Life is short, and the time we have with our loved ones is precious. I learned that the hard way, but I knew I had to move forward. I would keep my mother in my heart forever, but I also had to take care of the family I had left. And that was what mattered most now. Years went by, and life slowly became easier. My children grew up and started their own families. They always remembered their grandmother, and they would visit her grave whenever they could. It made me happy to see them keeping her memory alive. Sometimes we would all sit together and talk about her, sharing the stories we all remembered. It helped keep the sadness at bay. As I grew older, I often found myself thinking about the mistakes I had made in life. I regretted not spending more time with my mother when she was alive. I wished I could go back and change things, but I knew that was impossible. What I could do now was to make sure that I didn't make the same mistake again. I wanted to be there for my children, just as my mother had always been there for me. One day, I took my grandchildren to the same beach where I had taken my mother years ago. We sat on the sand, watching the waves crash against the shore. I told them stories about their great-grandmother and how much she had loved us. They listened carefully, asking many questions, and I was happy to share those memories with them. I realized then that even though my mother was no longer with us, her love and the lessons she taught me would live on in my family. I had learned to appreciate the time I had with the people I loved, and I made sure to always let them know how much they meant to me. Life is short, and we should never take our loved ones for granted. I had learned this the hard way, but I was grateful for the lessons I had learned along the way. As I sat there on the beach with my grandchildren, I smiled. I knew my mother would be proud of the family we had become, and though she was gone, she would always be with us in our hearts.